The Rebel Capitalist Show.
All right, guys, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome someone to the Rebel Capitalist Show that I am a huge fan of. He has amazing books. He's a tremendous author and kind of maybe a self-taught psychologist, although I think he took psychology in college, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. But his name is Rollo Tomassi. Rollo, welcome to the Rebel Capitalist Show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I've been meaning to come on your show for a while. I have all these people in my comments on my show saying, you got to hook up with this guy, George Gammon. You got to do this. He talked about, like, I believe you probably referenced me at least a couple times on this show. Yeah. And I've had commenters saying, you got to connect with this guy. So we're finally connecting.
Yeah, very cool. Well, I want to first start off by going over your brief history. Kind of Reader's Digest version for my viewers who might not be familiar with that, because it's very fascinating. Can you get us up to speed there?
Sure. Well, I have been writing in what we call the manosphere now since about 2001, 2002, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And I started out just by participating in forums at that time. The one that I was most commonly in was one called SoSwab, SOSCAUVE. And this was like back in the pickup artist days when Mystery and Neil Strauss and all these guys were doing their books, and they were kind of out in the field, and it was just like how to pick up girls. And we were just sort of getting into this global kind of consortium of guys who were coming together on forums and kind of comparing notes, because it was this new medium like the internet, right? And this was prior to Facebook, prior to Twitter, prior to any of this. So it was all based on like internet forums. And so I was already married at that time, but I was fascinated by this stuff because I was studying psychology then. And I was like, why would this stuff work? Why is this such a groundbreaking thing? Why are these guys out there going and doing these experiments and sort of bringing back their data and then discussing it amongst themselves and trying to come up with sort of techniques on how to better interact with women? And it was sort of locking in with what I was studying in psychology at that time. And so I was just participating in these forums from about 2002 until I started my blog in 2011. And a lot of the stuff that I write about on my blog, which is therationalmale.com, were derived from conversations that we had on SoSwab and alt-fast seduction and all these seduction communities that were going on at the time. And they were out there kind of doing psychological experiments and sociological experiments that you would never be able to do in like a college setting or a university setting because of ethical concerns. But these guys they didn't care about that. It was all about like, what's going on in my part of the world, and then saying, well, this is how the women are in my country and in this country and that. And it was just sort of this global, conglomeration of guys basically comparing notes. And from that, I was just kind of in a fortuitous time in my life, because that's what I was studying at that time. And I was doing peer counseling and I was also working in advertising. I've been an art director for most of my career anyways. I do brand identity. I do public relations. I wore a lot of hats in the industries that I worked in, which was gaming and alcohol and wine and spirits. And so at the same time I'm doing that, I had this just kind of like passionate kind of curiosity, interest in doing this. And so I was having these conversations with people, and I turned those into blog posts, which eventually turned into my books, which are the Rational Male series. The first one was published in 2013. And then I've got 4 others that have come out sort of subsequently, like every 2 years or so. And I never set out to be an author. I thought that the first book was going to be the only book I would ever write. And of course, the only way I could have published that book was through self-publishing, because no major publishing house is going to touch the kind of material that I'm putting out there. So, and then a lot of guys were getting into this. And so now Amazon and Kindle Direct Publishing and now Audible as well. You've got to have a Kindle, you've got to have a print book, which was something I did anyways, because I was a layout artist and a graphic designer on top of everything else. And then you got to have an audio book. So you've got to have those 3 things. And I was just sort of learning as I was going along. I thought, oh, well, I'll just put out a print book. No, where's your Kindle? Okay, so I got to do Kindle. And then now I got to do an audio book and find somebody to read that and figure that out. So I got this education in sort of publishing and doing what I'm doing on top of trying to stay on top of the intersexual dynamics and the things that are going on in what we now call the manosphere, but we didn't call it that back in the day. It was just like guys getting together in the seduction community, and we started calling it red pill and started making these analogies and metaphors to like the Matrix movies. Like there's blue pill guys and there's red pill guys, and that's sort of been bastardized since like 2014 to be like
everyone uses
or ideological. Everybody uses it now. So it's like whatever your pet truth happens to be, then suddenly that becomes red pill. But back in the day when we were first talking about this, it really started in the seduction communities and talking about intersexual dynamics. And so it was the guys who were sort of the old school guys who were still kind of locked into that old narrative about how to, like what I call the old order way of thinking about men and women versus the new order way of thinking about men and women, which is we have all this new data now. And whether it's, and I should also mention this is, it's kind of multi-field data. So it's not just evolutionary psychology or evolutionary biology, but it's also sociology, anthropology, a little bit of politics, a little bit of religion, a little bit, whatever kind of fits in between men getting together with women and having sex and forming families as ultimately as a result of that. And where do we go from there? Because human relationships are really what sort of drive all the rest of those other fields, right? So if men and women aren't coming together, then you don't get, social orders, and you don't get, the psychological side of things. And so it's kind of a multi-field sort of thing. So when somebody says, what's the red pill or what's your stuff about, it's really kind of hard to give you like an elevator speech because there's so much involved in it. And I'm always having to balance being concise with being like comprehensive. Being thorough and versus being concise. And so if I tend to get long-winded or if I tend to go on, it's usually because I feel like I always have to add the details that people are going, wait, he didn't think about that. And I did. I've been doing this for almost 20 years now. It's just that I'm trying to make it palatable and digestible for people at this point.
I think that gives people a pretty good foundation, because what I want to do is take what you've learned in the concepts and apply that to macroeconomics. So we can go through this with the viewer so they can get a better idea of how this applies to not just demographics, but other economic dynamics, so they can adjust their probabilities and their thinking for finances and what this might do to the real economy moving forward. But I think it's very interesting that you really kind of came to your conclusions the same way I did with macro, in the sense that you just take bits and pieces from everything. And maybe some individuals have no concern whatsoever with the science behind what they're doing. Their motives could be hooking up with more girls or whatever it may be, but you're taking that data and saying, no, there is something scientific here. And you're applying that to what you're learning in other areas. And then in your studies with psychology, and then kind of connecting the dots and coming to these conclusions that are based on data and facts, not just kind of, what a lot of people think it's just bro science or something like that.
Right. It's funny really you should say connecting the dots, because I don't know if you've read my first book, but that in my introduction of pretty much every book I've written, I say exactly that. All I do is really connect these dots, and I allow the reader to sort of come to conclusions on their own. A lot of people tend to think of like the red pill as sort of being ideological. I don't look at it at all as an ideology. I look at it as a praxeology, which is sort of the science of human behavior, as in knowing that like that has a purpose. There's a latent purpose or function to that behavior. What could that be? That's why, from my perspective, like things like evolutionary psychology, evolutionary biology, knowing sociology, knowing and not just the sexual side of things too. I mean, like the economic side. Great author God Saad has done a lot of good work. He's an evolutionary psychology doctorate in evolutionary. Yeah,
I've listened to a lot of his interviews.
Fantastic knowledge base, and not just about like intersexual dynamics, but like the economic reasons as to why consumers buy things from an evolutionary psychology perspective. And so it's not just about one field. And that's the other thing I was going to say, is that once you get into, like, a lot of guys get into like the red pill because they want to, like, I want a girlfriend, or I want to learn how do I get laid? I'm a virgin and I'm 24 years old or something like that. That's usually the starting point. And then from there, it's like, okay, now I've kind of figured this part out. What's the next phase? What comes after this? It's like, okay, I can reliably, go out and hook up with girls or whatever. Now I want to figure out something else. How do I become the best version of myself? How do I move on and mature a little bit more? Because a lot of the guys who first come into this, they really kind of fundamentally lack the social skills needed to even carry on a conversation with someone of the opposite sex. And then once they get confident in that, then they start, like, it opens up different worlds for them.
Yeah, but see, you hit the nail on the head there with behavioral economics. And I think that for my audience, we kind of lean toward the Austrian side or Austrian school of economics, but whether it's that or Keynesian economics, a lot of times people omit the psychological component regarding what drives decision-making of consumers and individuals and entities in the real economy. And if you don't include that in your thought process, I don't think you're going to have a very good predictive abilities for what may or may not happen in the future, especially now when we're dealing with things like, all the government spending, the stimulus, maybe universal basic income. I mean, these are, at the end of the day, these are all psychological questions that we've got to think through. So can you give us the short synopsis on hypergamy? Because I discussed this in one of my whiteboard videos on real estate. And real estate is something that affects everyone, whether you're a renter, whether you're a buyer, you've got a mortgage. Now we've got these eviction moratoriums, I believe they are. We've got the mortgage forbearance. Everyone, whether you're a renter, buyer, seller, you're trying to figure out what is going to happen to the real estate market. And that has a lot to do with household formation, which I think has a lot to do with hypergamy. So can you give us the basics there, and then we'll kind of expand on that?
Sure. Okay, so I've been known to do a talk or two about hypergamy. In fact, if you go and you look up the term hypergamy on Google right now, I think I'm probably listing at maybe number 4 on the returns.
Yeah.
So maybe I haven't looked in a while, but there was a time where I owned that term besides like Wikipedia. The way that I look at hypergamy is this. Now, there's 2 ways to look. When people look up the Wikipedia / dictionary definition of hypergamy, it's usually they go back to a sociological study done in, I believe, in the 50s or the 60s, and it was studying the caste system of marriage and everything in India at that time. And they brought up this term called hypergamy, which is that it, in the biblical sense, and the dictionary definition, is that women tend to marry up socioeconomically. So, and that's all it meant. And that's, everybody just left it alone until 2005. And then suddenly Rollo Tomassi comes along and tries to reinvent the wheel here. So, but from a sort of red pill perspective, hypergamy has 2 sides to it. It is fundamentally women's mating strategy. And women are looking for 2 things when it comes to optimizing hypergamy or optimizing that mating strategy. And I'll give you the clean version of it. It's alpha seed and beta need. And beta need is the long-term security aspect of that. So when you look at the biological needs of women are the most vulnerable sex. You can argue whether or not they want to call them the weaker sex or the frailer sex or the sensitive sex or whatever, but they are most definitely, by evolutionary standards, the more vulnerable sex, because they have the higher investment cost when it comes to reproduction. They get pregnant. They are essentially helpless in our ancestral past, helpless for 9 months. And then they have to raise the child from infancy to at least some form of self-sufficiency. So that might have been like 6 or 7 or 8 years old, depending. And then the process would repeat itself. But the women, by and large, in historical, ancestral, evolutionary perspectives, are the vulnerable sex. Men, on the other hand, are the protector sex. They're the sex that takes the risks. They have the lower investment costs when it comes to reproduction, because we have a different mating strategy than women do. So women's primary mating strategy is hypergamy.
And I want to jump in there just real quick, because basically what you're saying, if you think back 200 or 300 years ago, if you're that gal that is vulnerable during the time of pregnancy, if you have 3 or 4 kids and you're doing this all under the age of 20 years old, again, we're going back a few hundred years, and then maybe a few thousand years prior to that. If you pick the wrong guy, you got big problems.
It could be a death sentence. It could be a death sentence. Even if you pick the right guy, it could still be a death sentence, because it just depends on the circumstances of that time. I think that certainly in the 21st century, but maybe I would say most of the 20th century, I mean, the world's been a dangerous place and still is a dangerous place today, but it was much more dangerous for women prior to, let's just say, I don't know, the World War II, right?
Right.
And so from that perspective, you have to understand that that's going to cause a lot of different, what I call psychological firmware. So for women, it's going to be a security seeking overall. For most of a woman's life, it's going to be about long-term security. Finding the right guy, finding the guy who has the 3 Ps. And the 3 Ps are this: is protection, parental investment, and provisioning. Those are the 3 parts of the beta need side of hypergamy. Then you have the alpha seed side, which is the sexy sun side. It's the short-term sexual. It's find the best genetics possible, and at the same time balance that with the best of the provisioning side. So it's the long-term security with the hot guy in the foam cannon party, right? The guy who is like the hot fireman, the guy that she like was. There's a reason why 50 Shades of Grey was the #1 selling book of this, certainly of this century. Okay, it's because women are looking for the hot sexy fireman, right? They're looking for that. That's why those calendars sell, right? So there's that sexual need, there's that reproductive need, looking for, it's what's known as the sexy sons theory, which is looking for the guy who is the best genetic specimen that she can get with, or that her looks can attract. And women have a very short window, and over a course of a woman's lifetime, they have a very short window of opportunity where they can maximize that alpha seed side of hypergamy, knowing that later on they're going to need for the most of their life is going to be long-term security in the beta need side of hypergamy.
So they prioritize those 2 things differently at different stages in their life. And the reason we're focusing on the gals right now is because for guys, it's pretty darn easy. For the girls, we need to understand the complexities here and the nuance, so then we can extract what we need to lay over the economics. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
So as a result of that, when we put women into positions of power, when they come into political power or social power, the first priority that women, what I call the sisterhood uber alles, has is they're looking for an optimization between the alpha seed side of hypergamy and the beta need side. And so women, I think, instinctually know from a very early age that between, say, the ages of, say, 18 to about maybe 28 years old, that's going to be their window of opportunity to lock down the guy who is the alpha male, the guy who is going to be the good breeding stock, the guy who's going to, she's going to be able to have sexy sons with. And then later on, and we see this, we're reflected in marriage rates, by the way, right now, is from 29 to about 31. That's what I call the epiphany phase. And that's when women sort of say, well, I've had my fun, or I was so crazy in college. Or maybe they're single mothers and they've reproduced with guys who were their alpha ideals at that time, and realizing they can't lock that guy down, or he's not the best guy to be in a long-term relationship with. And suddenly their priorities shift. Right around 29 to 31. So now it's like, I want to get right with God, and I want to start a family. And coincidentally, my biological clock is ticking, and I need to have babies right now if she hasn't had them already. And that's when you hear certain vernacular and tropes that come out during that time, like, oh man, what happened to all the nice guys? We're all the good guys at this time. And what they're essentially bemoaning at that time is an inability to find a guy who is a good long-term prospect for them. Because if you look at it this way, if a woman lives, let's just say average lifespan of a woman is 90 years, okay? And I'm being generous there. 90 years. From the time she's about 18 till the time she's about 28, that's only 10 of 90 years. For the rest of those 80 years, she's going to overwhelmingly need long-term security. She's going to need the house. She's going to need the protection, all the 3 Ps, right? Provisioning, protection, and parental investment for more of her life than she will have in her window of opportunity to sort of optimize the alpha seed side of things. So security, long-term security, love, commitment, emotion, all this other stuff, that has to be at least more or less taken care of. So when you look at the decisions that women make in the long term economically as well, is that they are looking for a long-term security and insurance of that it's security. Because again, there's that psychological firmware that tells women that they are the vulnerable sex. So what do? We come up with policies legislation, economic, political, social, conventions that ensure that long-term security, because that is the overarching need for women in the long term for the rest of their lives. So while they have that 10-year window and they're living it up and they're doing OnlyFans and they're, they're doing their, trying to maximize the, capitalize, I guess, on that window of opportunity, by and large, from the time they get to be about, say, 30 till 90, whenever they die, or maybe even up to menopause, you're looking for long-term security. And so when you look at the policies that we instill in sort of a gynocentric social order, they're all geared to ensure that beta buck side of hypergamy. And once that's more or less assured, then women want to believe that they have longer to look for Mr. Right. And I think that that's where we're kind of at right now. That's one of the sort of the dirty tricks dirty tricks, but it's certainly the evolution of how that society and that body politic, I guess, caters to the mating strategies of women right now, when we prioritize women as the social authority, the political authority, the legislative authority, whatever you want, even religious authorities at this point right now. And it's all directed towards that security side of things, while kind of, nod and wink to the girls who are still in their prime fertility phases.
Yeah. So let's go back, and you talked about long-term prospects, and for any of the people that are new to this may come as a shock. They might not have heard this, or maybe some of the women who watch the show say, oh, well, that doesn't really apply to me. And it might not. We're just talking about general, but you got to understand that even if this isn't your priority or someone that we're talking about the hardwiring, the evolutionary hardwiring from thousands of years of going through this. And but you talked about long-term prospects. So as women mature, they're looking for different things, but as their level of education increases, as their income levels increase, what they consider to be a good quality long-term prospect from a guy, that also increases. And in other words, their standards increase, because for a guy, you get some guy that's making $200,000 or $300,000 a year, and you ask him, hey, would you date some gal from McDonald's that works at McDonald's? He's not going to. The first thing he's going to say is, well, is she good looking? That's what the guy's going to say. Just pretty straightforward. Whether we like it or not, it is what it is. But like we said, with women, there's different dynamics at play. So if women are making more and more money and becoming more and more educated, that may be great, and I'm all for that. But the reality is, it's going to limit the amount, or reduce the amount of males that they would consider to be quality long-term prospects. Is that correct?
Very much so. You probably have read these articles. I think they came out about 2019, about how women were having trouble, and this is women who are, like, say, after the age of 30, are having trouble finding their educational equals, and they were turning guys down because they were economically unattractive. That was the terminology that was used, I believe, by the New York Times and maybe the Atlantic as well. And what it comes down to is that women are not looking for equals. They're looking for someone who excels them in education, in business acumen, in money, for sure. One of the clearest indicators, or I should say the higher incidence, I guess, of divorce comes when a couple is making the same amount of money, or maybe the man or the husband is making more, and the woman gets a promotion, or she gets in some way, moves up in status in the company that she's in. And the moment she starts making more money, that is a trigger for divorce. The divorce rates increase dramatically when that happens. So it's not just about, we want to be equal partners, or we want to be in an egalitarian marriage or something like that. The problem is there's a biological and evolutionary aspect that goes along with this. Well, a woman needs a man that she can look up to and respect. Right. So when we talk about economic unattractiveness, I've seen the numbers for this as well, by the way, is they said that I believe it was the man, the husband, is expected to make at least as much, and to be economically attractive, he must make 58% more money than that woman is actually making at that time. And I want to say I got that from, like, either Morgan Stanley, or I got that from Forbes at one point. So when it comes to economic attractiveness, that guy has to make at least half again, if not more than half again, what that woman is making. And that's becoming increasingly more difficult for guys right now, because women outstrip men when it comes to college educations. It's like 65 or 70% women compared to like 30% of men that are in colleges right now. Men tend to be more what Jordan Peterson has called they're part of the Lost Boys generation right now. And what that means is that they're kind of purposeless and, rudderless in life right now, looking for whatever it is that they think that they ought to be doing. And marriage is not the incentive that it used to be, say back in like even the 80s or the 70s and 60s. And so guys don't realize, or they don't see any point or any incentive in, catering a life around becoming a husband, becoming a father, or becoming that economically attractive guy when that woman needs him the most. So when you look at the average age of first marriage in the United States, anyways, for men, it is 29.8. And for women, it's like 28.7 or something like that. And that's just the US. And you have to also look at the demographic of people who are actually getting married. Usually it's people who are of a higher socioeconomic, income bracket right there. In the UK, first age of marriage is something around like 34 or 33 for men and women, which is crazy when you think about it, because back as far back as like, say, like the end of the 60s, like 65 or 66, I think it was, average age of first marriage was 22 for a man and 20 for a woman. Right. And so you're only talking maybe about a 50-year difference. And this is what's happened in that time. And so as a result of that, Nick, what's causing that? If you go back in time and you look at where all the sort of social changes are happening when it comes to intersexual dynamics, whether it's the rise in divorce, the plummeting marriage rates right now, which are at their lowest ever. When you look like what is causing this, how are we getting to the point where we're at in this? But when we're talking about putting families together, when we're talking about men and women coming together and forming marriages, or even getting married, to be the idea of a desire to even want to become married is unpopular right now. We have to look at why that is. And I think at this stage, when we look at this sort of higher standard that women have for men when it comes to economic attractiveness, again, we're looking at the beta buck side of hypergamy in this. So if a woman says, well, I need a guy who has some more education, he's got to be taller than me, he's got to have six-pack abs, he's got to have six-figure income, he's got to have an education, he's got to, like, all of this laundry list of things that make him her equal, not just like above her, but she wants to believe that that's what she deserves, and that's where equality comes in, and that is her due. It's sort of a sense of entitlement, and settling for anything less is settling. And that settling kind of goes against what I've said in the past, is this ideal of the strong, independent woman, that if you settle for anything less than the best, then you're wasting your life, and you're getting with a guy who is not going to provide those 3 Ps: provisioning, protection, and parental investment. So there comes kind of like this paradox for women, because the time is running out. When they are 21, 22, 23 years old, they have much more, let's say, bargaining power in the sexual marketplace at that time of their lives. And once they get to be about 34, 35, 36, the guys that they want to get with, the guys who are economically attractive, and the ones who are like the higher value guys that they want to get with, those guys are not looking for a woman who is 34, 35, 36 years old. They're looking for the hot 22-year-old, 23-year-old, 24-year-old that they were unable to get with until they hit their prime, which now they're in their sort of sexual market value years peaks, right? If they've maximized their potential and everything else. They're not looking for those women. They're looking for women who they want to start a family with, who is going to be younger, in a much younger demographic. And then you also mentioned something here I wanted to point out too, is that there's a really great book. It's called Dataclysm. And it's all this gathered data, I guess, about the sexual marketplace, courtesy of things like OkCupid and online dating profiles. And one of the data sets in that book shows that for men find women the most attractive, or like the best looking, between the ages of, like, say, 21 and 23 years old. And that's across demographics. So a kid as young as 15 and a guy as old as 90 find women who are between the ages of 21 and 23, somewhere around there, the most attractive. For women, it's much different. So when you've got a woman who say is 24 years old, she's looking for a guy who's between 27 and into maybe his early 30s. It's usually an older guy, but between the ages of say like 3 to 7 years somewhere. So if you've got a woman who's 30, she's looking for a guy who's between like say 34 to 37 years old, somewhere around there. And it staggers up as women get older. So they're always looking for that guy, because that guy, and this is me spitballing here, that guy represents a security potential for her. He's the guy who's going to be able to provide the 3 Ps and still look good enough for her to still want to have sex with and start a family with, and have that sort of romantic ideal that's going on with the alpha seed side of hypergamy. And so when you look at those sets, you looked at men tend to look for women who are younger, hotter, tighter, right? They're looking for the fertility cues in a younger woman who is between the ages of 21 and 23 years old. And the joke, of course, is that they call the store Forever 21, not Forever 41, because that's what men are looking for. The cosmetic industry is not the multi-bazillion dollar juggernaut it is, because women want to look older. Right, it's because they want to look younger and more, and those are just the basics of it. But the longer we ignore this, the more we're going to ignore the problems and the fallout that is the result of women not, it's hard for me to say, lower your standards, ladies. They're not going to do that. Nobody wants to do that. No, it's like me saying, oh, well, you get with a fat girl or something, guys. They don't, or get with an older, they don't want to do that. So, you're going against sort of biological imperatives.
Yeah, but see, that's where I want to take this conversation, because you're talking about guys now being rudderless. And when you use that word, I just think of universal basic income. I think of the government literally paying people over the last year and a half to stay home and not produce and not work, which for a guy is really their identity.
Yes.
If you have a guy, especially a young guy or an old guy, it doesn't really matter, that they're just staying home doing nothing all day long but watching TV, that does not put them in a good headspace at all.
Men are deductive problem solvers. We need to have a purpose. We need to have a function.
Yeah, but if we're setting up this environment where they can become more rudderless, and that's bringing their attractiveness, like their economic attractiveness, down, while at the same time the standards for women are going up, I'm having a hard time, let's say, connecting those dots. I mean, what's the end game there? Do we get to a point where there's no marriage and there's no kids being born except for when women go to a sperm bank? Or, I mean, is that where we're headed? Or
more or less. I mean, you can look at if you look at the fertility rates, especially amongst Western countries right now, it is below replacement level for most Western countries. That's including the United States, depending on the demographic, but including the United States, including certainly the UK. A lot of sort of what we would call industrialized nations, the fertility rate is below replacement levels right now, certainly throughout Western Europe at this stage, as a result of this constant, what you're talking about, like social programs and such like that, but also as a result of this mindset that nothing else will do. And again, this is something that is a recent development too. It's only 50, maybe 60 years old, and this is where we've gone in the last 50 or 60 years. We're not talking 100 years. We're not talking 200 years. We're only talking a very brief moment in human history at this stage. So where do we go with that? Well, you're talking about, is nobody going to get married? No one wants to get married right now, at least in Western countries. I've talked about this in my 4th book as well. Is that we are now, statistically, we are at the lowest marriage rate since they started keeping records of marriage in the United States right now. I think it's like something like 6.1 or 6.5% per 1,000. And that's not sustainable. And you have to remember that a lot of the success of this country and a lot of the economic success of most industrialized nations have revolved around family units, whatever those are. It doesn't necessarily have to be the nuclear family, but men and women have to have some incentive to get together and form families and start businesses and start, to have some sort of incentive. And I was going to say is that men from a sort of evolutionary perspective, we're problem solvers and we're deductive problem solvers. So A plus B equals C. And we're looking for sort of that plan or that set. And right now, we have so overemphasized women's confidence and success and what I call the fempowerment narrative. As I was just saying, more women control more wealth right now. We keep hearing constantly about this 77 cents on the dollar kind of thing, which is just ludicrous if you look at it in perspective of the choices that women make.
Right.
But although we can say, well, women don't make as much as men, they spend more than men. They are in control of more wealth than men are right now. I believe, I'm looking at it right here, over the course of a family's life, 90% of married women will control the wealth of that family. And so when we look at the spending and with female women are the primary consumers in Western society. So when we look at the focus that has been placed on putting women into the workplace, putting women into social settings that were traditionally male, like what we call male spaces, the military, everything else, where we're focusing only on one sex, that's at the expense of, if it were about, it's never been about equality, right? If it was about equality, we wouldn't have the Lost Boys generation right now. And the result is that we have this sort of generation of young men who are purposeless and they don't know what to do with themselves. And we're only exacerbating that by coming up with, social programs to encourage that and to perpetuate that. And eventually it breaks down. People ask me this all the time. I just got asked this on my show yesterday was, how do we solve this? How do we change this? And I'm saying, other than war or a meteor hitting the earth, finding some sort of purpose is kind of tough for guys right now because they don't know what to do with themselves. They are taught to become more feminine, to get in touch with their emotions, to be more expressive, to, and we raise, I think it was Camille Paglia who said this, is that we raise our boys as if they're defective girls right now. And so what happens is you get a generation, not of defective girls, but of defective young women who are men who don't know what to do with themselves because they don't have any purpose or any function. As a result, you get lower marriage rates, you get lower investment in things like education. And so, yes, of course, there's going to be a sort of a drought, I guess, of economically attractive men. And our solution up to this point is to say, ladies, lower your standards. And they're not going to do that because they're not biologically wired to do so. So to say that, oh, it's a mental thing, we have to change the way our society works, and we got to think, and higher, we got to evolve above this. And women are saying, no, I don't want to do that. I would rather live alone and die alone, because they have the security side already taken care of for them by the government, by social programs and special dispensation, just because they are women.
Or they're doing it themselves by their higher education.
Or they're doing it themselves. Exactly. Or they're getting it through, they're having resource transfers through, other means. Divorce is one of those right now.
Right.
I was looking at I think it was Forbes list of the richest 60 women in the United States right now. And all but like 4 of them made their money through a divorce settlement, or they got it through an inheritance. They came into the business or whatever through an inheritance. It's not that they were self-made billionaires. It was because that they came into it because of some sort of institutionalized wealth transfer that put them into the position that they're in. So of the 64 of them are like self-made billionaires. The rest have come into that money and then, managed it and done whatever they're doing, to their credit or whatever. But they did not come into it by creating that or solving a problem or building something. And I think that's something that we have to kind of keep in mind when we say, okay, well, this is female empowerment. Well, okay, great. But how do they come into that, and what are they doing with it once they've got it?
Yeah, so let's go back to what you're saying about we'll call it the Lost Boys generation, where you have a larger and larger percentage of males who are not only rudderless, but just putting things blunt, they can't get a date. And because of the dynamics that we talked about earlier, there's, more and more women are after a smaller percentage of guys. Therefore, if there's let's say it was the Pareto distribution that 20% of the guys were 80% of the women or something like that. Well, now we're getting to a point where it's maybe 10% of the guys or maybe 5% of the guys, because they're the only ones that qualify from a socioeconomic standpoint to meet those standards we were referring to. So you've got a group of guys was 80%. Now it's 90%. Maybe now it's 95%. How does that affect them psychologically? And what I'm thinking through is over the last couple of years, especially in the United States, we have seen a dramatic rise in social unrest.
Oh, yeah.
And so when you're talking about this Lost Boys generation, I know what it was like to be a 12-year-old boy. And if I didn't have sports or athletics, something positive to focus my time and energy on, I would have been in jail. I absolutely would have been in jail. I can say that with almost 100% confidence. And so that's the first question I'd like to ask. The number two is, how does that affect economic output? Because yes, it's great that we've got a lot of women entrepreneurs now, but women do tend overall, not all of them, but overall tend to make different decisions. A lot of times it's guys that are going out there and taking a lot of risk to start that business that eventually will produce more and more goods and services for society. And at the end of the day, that is the definition of wealth. So you have all of these rudderless guys. Does that lead to more social unrest and potentially less economic output?
I would definitely say so. Let's start with the Pareto principle first off, because a lot of guys get this, especially in the manosphere, kind of get this wrong. Is they tend to think that when we look at hypergamy also has another element to it. Women don't date down; they only date up. They're only looking for the bigger and the better deal. They're not looking for parity. They're looking for the higher sexual market value than they actually even deserve. So if you got a woman who, and I'm just using figurative numbers here, if you got a woman who's like a 6, she's looking for a guy who is at least a 6 himself, or a 7 or an 8.
And a 6 on up. Measuring their socioeconomic status.
It can be both. It can be their sexual market value. It can be their socioeconomic status. It just sort of depends on what that woman's prioritizing at that particular time.
For guys, almost always prioritize physical appearance.
For men, men's innate mating strategy is unlimited access to unlimited sexuality. And if you don't believe me, or if you think that that's horribly deterministic or Darwinistic, all you have to do is look at how popular pornography is right now, and why is porn so
or OnlyFans. I mean,
or OnlyFans, right? I can prove this to you in a million different ways that our innate mating strategy, given no hindrances, no filters, no nothing, guys will go for unlimited access to unlimited sexuality, which is why we have free online streaming 4K pornography anytime, any place, on any smart device that you want.
And Rollo, before we move on, I'd love for you to give one more example. You talked about using that example for the males, but for the females, I think you were the one that I heard this fantastic story. And maybe it wasn't you, but I'm sure you've heard about it. And I think for the females who might be watching this, the guys that say, "Oh, I don't know if I'm really buying this stuff about hypergamy. It doesn't apply to me or my friends." The story I always use is it was a psychological experiment that was done, I believe, where they had a drummer for a band. And I know you were in a band as well, so you can relate. But they had the drummer that the gals or maybe the crowd didn't recognize that well. And they had him sit by the bar of the venue like 2 hours prior to the show and try to pick up ladies and buy them a drink or something like that. And they wouldn't give him the time of day. They literally would not give him the time of day. But then what happened is he went up on stage, and everyone saw that, oh my gosh, that was the drummer of the band, and everyone's cheering, and they love the music and whatnot. And then they have him come out after everyone saw him up there on stage, and then do the exact same thing. And the gals were literally throwing their phone number.
Opening him, yes.
So if you don't believe what we're saying is true from a scientific standpoint, how would you explain that?
Yeah, well, there's a lot that goes along with it. It's easy to manufacture actual social proof. In fact, that's one of the first things that the early pickup artists attempted to do, was to find a way to manufacture pre-selection and social proof. And that's exactly what that part is. For as far as guys are concerned, when it comes to like the Pareto principle, women do not have an attraction floor, or I should say they have an attraction floor. Men do not have an attraction floor. So when we look at a woman who is looking for a guy who is she's a 6 herself, and she's looking for a guy who is at least a 6. And if she's with the 6, she's looking for the 7. She's looking for the next. And why wouldn't she, right? Why wouldn't she want to maximize that? That's an evolutionary imperative for women, is to look for a better than deserved pairing in the sexual marketplace. And then for men, because men are sort of that we reproduce opportunistically. So when, you probably heard this before, no one's ugly after 2 a.m. kind of thing, where it's like, it's like, well,
my buddies used to say, what was it say? We'd say a 10 at 2 and a 2 at 10 or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So men do not have an attraction floor, whereas women do. And why is that? Because women have a higher investment cost when it comes to reproduction. That's why. It's very simple mechanics there. So what does that do? How does that affect women's mating strategy versus men's mating strategy? For women, they are looking for the guy who's the bigger and better deal, always looking for that. And people seem to think that hypergamy is a straitjacket. It's according to where that woman is in her phase of maturity and how well she can sort of work that angle for as long as she can work it. So it's not like some sort of death sentence where it's like, oh, I'm a 6 and she's a 6. And it's like, well, maybe you have other aspects of you that push you over the top a little bit more than you think you do. So it's not necessarily a straitjacket. The other aspect is that, so you're looking at sort of things on a graduated hierarchy for women. So if she's a 6, she's looking for 7, 8, 9. It's if she can get a 10, she'll get a 10, right? For guys, it's whatever's available, man. Men would love to get with if they're a 6 themselves, they'd love to get with a 7 or an 8. But if she's drunk and he's drunk and it's 2 a.m. at the bar or whatever, they're going to get with a 5 or a 4, slump busting, that kind of stuff. Sure. Because it's opportunistic. So what that creates for women, at least, is what we call the 80-20 rule, right? So 100% of women are looking for the top 20% of men. It's not just 80%. Okay. It's the 100% of women are looking for the top 20% of guys. Whereas the top, so what does that do for the percentage of guys? Well, that puts guys into either the 80 percentile or the 20th percentile that women want to get with and would have sex with, or would certainly say, I would consider having sex with that
or start
guy,
a relationship or
start
form
a relationship with. And that's the other side. I wanted to make sure that we point this out, because remember, there's a dualistic nature to hypergamy. So there's the alpha seed and the beta need side of things. I think too many people, including Jordan Peterson and the rest of these guys, don't want to address the alpha seed side. They only want to say that the only thing that women care about is your economic attractiveness, how good a security prospect you are. Are you good with the kids? Are you going to be a good husband? Are you going to be loyal? Are you going to be loving? Are you funny? All this laundry list of things, without looking at the fact that 50 Shades of Grey was the #1 book in the country, and still probably is, because women still, and romance literature is essentially female porn. Women still want to get with the hot guy in the foam cannon party in Cancun on spring break. Right? I was drunk, he was cute, and one thing led to another kind of thing. There's still the sexual aspect, and women are much more open about that than they have been in the past, because women's mating strategy prior to, say, the 21st century, it behooved women to keep that secret. And now we're in an age of what I call open hypergamy. You will see this in commercials right now. I just saw it in the Super Bowl commercials back in February, the Amazon, the Alexa unit thing. And it was this, I think it was, Michael B. Jordan was in it. Yeah. And it was like, she was just lusting after this fantasy of Michael B. Jordan being the voice of the Alexa unit. And she's got this guy who is the ideal for the alpha seed side of hypergamy, but at the same time, she's got her dutiful husband going, "What's going on? How come like he's just this idiot who's supplying her with this humorous situation, but she's got everything she has, and she's got all this this perfect wifely lifestyle, but she's still lusting after this one guy. So you've got that balance that maybe all women can't find an optimization of. So you've got that guy who's the Michael B. Jordan, right? The hot alpha guy is the 20 percentile. Then you've got the rest of the guys who are in the 80th percentile. And this is not something that is new. So what men tend to do is they tend to focus only on the side of hypergamy that they are the best at. So if they can't be Jason Momoa, if they can't be, Michael B. Jordan, well, at least they can be a good husband, and they can do homework with the kids, and they can be a good provider and a good supporter. And that might be the attraction side of that equation. But the arousal side belongs to Jason Momoa, and it belongs to the fantasy, and it belongs to 50 Shades of Grey. So you've got the guys who are in the 80th percentile.
And also, too, I want to point out there, Rollo, that the attractiveness part not only comes from physical appearance, but also that socioeconomic. So if the guy's got to be doing well, always be doing better and better and better and better, that's really going to set off that attraction.
Attraction is different from arousal, and I think too many people make that they don't make that distinction. Arousal is he's hot and I really want to get after it with him. I really want to get on this guy. And then there's the attraction side. So when you ask a woman, like, what do you look for in a guy? She's going to say, oh, he's got to have money. He's got to love his mom. He's got to like puppy dogs. He's got to have the same religion as me. All these things that are in the long-term side of hypergamy, the stuff that is a long-term security providing, that's the attraction side of hypergamy. Then there's the arousal side, which is short-term sexual, and he's got to have a nice butt, he's got to have a six-pack abs, he's got to have a V-taper, he's got to have a chiseled jawline, that kind of stuff. That's the arousal side of that. So at different phases of a woman's maturity, she's more or less able to get one or the other. So it might be very easy for her to get the security side of hypergamy settled. In fact, that's all we practically do right now is ensure that women are going to have a right to a child, whether it's a sperm bank or freezing their eggs, which is something that big corporations is a benefit for women in management right now. You look at the side of things that women would need in long-term security, and we provide that in spades. Or else we provide the perception that women can get to it if they need to get to it in the future. So what does that leave? That only leaves the alpha seed side of hypergamy, and that's what women tend to focus on. That's why you get 50 Shades of Grey being the top, the number. There's another one on Netflix right now. I think it's called 365 DNI or something like that, which is like the more like sexual version of 50 Shades of Grey, which is more popular now. But you've got that side as that's what women are primarily focusing on, because they know that whether it's through education, maybe they got their own business, maybe it's, whatever they think that their entitlements are, or whatever that security side is for the most of their life, if that's already taken care of, if you say, I'm taking care of protection, provisioning, and parental investment for you ladies, what's left? Right. It's only the alpha seed side, and that's what they tend to focus on, which is exactly where you get the Lost Boys generation from, because you've got this 80% of guys who think that if they maximize themselves being the attractive side, the attraction side of hypergamy, that they're going to eventually get married. They're eventually going to solve their own reproductive problem, because they're not the top 20% of guys. Mm-hmm. So they're going to play to their strengths. Well, the problem is in an industrialized society, certainly Western societies, women have no use for those guys anymore. They have no use for the Lost Boys. They have no use for somebody who's not making 58% more money than they are, because why would they? Why wouldn't they be focusing on the hot guy in the foam cannon party? Why would they not look for the guy who is the alpha male all the time? Because they've already got the beta buck side of hypergamy, more or less, at least the perception anyways, is that it's already been accounted for. So they're only going to focus on one side.
In the future, they're going to focus more and more on the alpha side of things at any age,
already doing
not just after the epiphany phase.
Yeah, they're already doing it. The joke is there's a little cartoon that's going around right now. It's been out since I think 2014 or 2015. But in the first panel, it's like this. It's in this cubicle kind of office space, and this hot guy who looks like he's like in a nice suit and everything. And there's a secretary, and he says, "Hey, looking good, Susan." And Susan's like, "Oh, yeah, hi," kind of thing. And the next panel, it's a fat kind of schlubby guy who looks like, a typical office worker. And he says exactly the same thing. "Looking good, Susan," like this. And she's on the phone and she's like, "HR, help," she's calling HR. And we laugh at that, but it's funny because that's where we're at right now. It's sexual harassment if the schlubby fat guy, beta male guy, tries to say exactly the same thing as the alpha male guy does, who's the top 20%, right? And then the schlubby guy is the 80%. He gets the call to HR. The other guy gets, she gushes and she giggles and twitters about the whole thing. And that is the Pareto principle in one cute little comic right there, because women themselves will laugh at that. They'll go, "Yeah, that's the way things are." And so when that is repeated enough, and when you raise generations of men from behind a screen and they see that often enough, they go, "What's the point? Why would I want to be that? Why would I be the guy who gets called HR gets called on me? And so you get groups of guys like MGTOW or the Black Pill guys who are just basically give up on the sexual marketplace altogether. And women who already have that, who believe that they have an entitlement to the hot 20% guys, they're okay with that. That's when you get Me Too. Me Too is more of the hashtag Me Too is more of a filter for guys. So the guys see, Brett Kavanaugh, or they see a guy go up the river for a sexual harassment Me Too charge or whatever, whether it's real or it's not. They see that and they go, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to have anything to do with that. And as a result, you get the Lost Boys generation. You get a socioeconomic depression because they're not creating businesses because they have no incentive to do anything like that. They're just like, I'm out. I'm just not going to deal with this anymore. And so you've got women who get to be 34, 35 years old, and they're bitter and upset because they couldn't get the hot guy that they thought they, deserved. And the guys who they think they deserve are in no way interested in them. That like the top 20%, and maybe even in, like you were saying, it might even be the top 5%. And they're not looking for those women. They're looking for the hot, younger, tighter, funner, no baggage, no children in tow, no single mommies. They're looking for a young woman between 25, 26, 27 years old.
Yeah, but it seems like the end game demographically is that more women are having children later on in life, maybe with or without a guy, if they don't really have to worry about the beta need side of the equation. And then therefore we have more children potentially being raised by single mothers. And then I'm just thinking this through out loud. Then okay, so they're surrounded more by that female dynamic because they've got a mother at home, single mom, and then all their teachers are female. And so if you've got a guy that's being raised in that, and then you have fewer kids being born, therefore would you have more of this helicopter parenting that we've seen? Because if a gal has 4 or 5 kids, you obviously you love all your kids, but you're not as hyper focused on their safety as you are if you're a 43-year-old gal and you just have 1 kid, right? So then do we have in the future, in 10, 20 years, do we have more safe spaces? Do we have far more kids, female or male, being raised in a single mother type of atmosphere? And then does that just exacerbate the economic problems or the social unrest that we're seeing now as a result of this dynamic playing out over the last couple decades?
Yes, most definitely. You were asking me about like the social unrest that we see right now. Do you remember the Arab Spring from 2013, 2014?
Yep.
And the demographic of the Arab Spring were young men between the ages of say like 19 and about 24, 25 years old, unemployed. And they really, and again, this is in an Islamic, Muslim countries, they don't have any prospect for reproducing, right? They're not they cannot have sex unless they are married. They can't have a family if they're not married. And so you've got a high percentage of guys who are sort of who don't know what else to do with themselves. So they're easy to radicalize. They're easy to put into what happened during the Arab Spring. Same thing is happening here in the United States right now. You have a high degree of unemployment amongst the same demographic, 19 to 24. In fact, the general survey study of, I think it was 2018 or 2019, showed that young men between the ages of 18 and 24 or 29, I'm not really sure, were having less sex than in any other generation, if they were having sex at all, most of which were reporting that they were still virgins within that demographic. Women, on the other hand, it only slightly went up by like a couple percentage points in the decade from 2008 to 2018. Now, people say, well, that's on those guys. And then you want to make it a social problem. Well, they're just incels, or they're just virgins, or they just can't figure it out, or they're low quality guys. And so we can come up with, they're just losers, right? Well, those losers become the guys that are out there pulling down statues in Portland. They're the guys who are out there setting things on fire because they have no other prospects and they don't know what else to do with themselves. So yes, it's definitely a high contributor to that. As far as birth rates are concerned, 42% of children are born out of wedlock in the United States right now. So to single mothers. And that's another thing I've always said is it's the cult of the child, right? Whatever works.
Do you know what that trend line has been, Rollo? Like you say 42%.
Mhm.
Any idea what it was around 2000 or 1990?
Well, it's increased. And again, this is something I put in my fourth book is if you go and you want to know where the catalyst for all this was, it's happened. All of these stats begin to go up or they begin to go down sharply right around 1965. What happened in 65? Hormonal birth control and the sexual revolution. Those are the two things that happened at that time during the boomer generation, of course. And so you see a rise in divorce rates right out and almost immediately after hormonal birth control becomes sort of standard, ubiquitous in the society. And then you get the sexual revolution that comes right after that. And there's lots of things that go along with that as well. But you see that divorce increases. You have abortion. Roe v. Wade becomes the law of the land. You see marriage rates decrease. You see no fault divorce becomes into being. You see child support come into being, like the way that we're at. Though we still keep alimony more or less what it was from the Depression era. That doesn't change too much. But you look at the rise of single motherhood increases. And prior to the sexual revolution, single motherhood was something that was very shameful. Like my mother-in-law, who she lives in the unit downstairs here, she was saying it like prior to like 1965, if a woman got pregnant before she was married or she was a single mother, the family would, it wasn't necessarily a religious thing. They had to take the girl and do what's called put her away. Like let her have the kid, put it up for adoption, or let the baby be raised by the grandparents or whatever. And then she could sort of come back because it would bring great shame. It was a stigma that was attached to single motherhood. Today, really since the 1970s, really late 70s, you're a superhero now if you're a single mother. You're doing it all. And right now we hold that up as sort of like the highest form of parenting is to be a single mother. Whereas for men, it's you need more responsibility with next to no amount of authority anymore because the kids can be taken away from you at any time. You have no say in the birth process. Once the sperm has left your body, you have no control over anything at that point. When it comes to abortion, women have 100% control over abortion. My body, my choice. When you look at the Duluth model of feminism, when you look at child custody laws that have happened, all of those, the catalyst for those, where we start to see the increase or the stark decrease, all 1965, all right when the sexual revolution happened and all when hormonal birth control was introduced.
Yeah, and I think the main takeaway there is whatever you're trying to figure out, whether it's in economics or in this case, psychological effects and trends, you've got to understand that there are no solutions, as Thomas Sowell said. There are only trade-offs. And what you just described since 1965, there are a lot of people that can name all the positive things that have come as a result of that. And I would totally agree, but you've got to not only look at the positive things, you're looking at it just in a vacuum. You've got to look at all the pros and cons, everything combined to determine, okay, it's not about being nice or about being emotional or about being politically correct. It's about looking at what happened and just saying it is what it is. These are the positive consequences. These may have been the negative consequences. Now, how is this going to play out in the future? I know that one of your recent books, if not your most recent, dealt with religion. And it's something that I've thought about quite a bit in terms of economics and investing in the stock market lately, and cryptocurrencies, things like Bitcoin and stocks like Tesla that for a lot of people seem significantly overvalued. And back, and I'm sure you'd probably know this better than I would due to your book, maybe 30, 40 years ago, our society really revolved around religion to a certain extent. It was much more of a priority. It gave a lot of people or more people meaning. And again, it's not that it's good or bad. It's just, it is what it is. And now we've kind of moved away from that. And if you're going to argue that people need some sort of meaning in their life that was filled or satisfied by religion, and now they don't have that meaning, doesn't that make them more tribal and try to gravitate towards something, anything that fills that void? And so is that correct? And then how does that play out, or how does that layer over this lost boys generation, or maybe a lot of the women that are finding it so difficult to find an adequate person to date and or marry?
Prior to the sexual revolution, the way most couples got together was either through school, through friends or family, and through the church. Right now, the number one skyrocket ever since like about 2005, 2007, the skyrocketing way couples come together is online. It's always through Tinder, it's through Hinge, it's through Bumble, it's all, or heck, even Instagram. I talked with the guys in Fresh and Fit about this. Instagram is the number one dating application, really, when you think about it, because you are your own brand right now. I don't care if you're George Gammon, right? This is what you talk about. This is your YouTube channel. You're your own brand. I'm my own brand as well. But even the young girl who's 18 years old, who has a big, huge, live archive of photos and stuff, she is branding herself as whatever that personality happens to be. So when couples get together, it's like similar to like when you go and you're interviewing for a job. As soon as you leave that office, they go, okay, let's look at his Facebook, let's look at his Instagram. Is he really who he says he is? It's the same thing as far as couples coming together. But what used to be the sort of the matchmaker, let's say, was religion, it was school, and it was friends. And religion, up until pre World War II, maybe even post war, was church. And you would find your husband or your wife through church or through family who were going to the same church anyways, and possibly going to school. Again, remember, women didn't really get into education as much as they did until they got into like the 50s and 60s and 70s. So yeah, there was always that buffer. That's the other thing I was going to say, is like when I was saying about how there was a stigma for single mothers prior to that, was the family side of things. When I talk about like hypergamy, or I talk about like how men's innate mating strategy is unlimited access to unlimited sexuality, there has to be buffers that are in place, so that guys have to have some kind of self-control over their sexual side, because you can't have these guys just running around doing, being, angst-ridden, oversexed, guys. It's not good for society. The problem is when we talk about like women and repressing women's sexuality, we say women don't like the church, or they don't like the social repression or the patriarchy or whatever. The problem is that what they think of as repression is actually buffers against the worst aspects of their own mating strategy as well. So there's upsides. There's certainly pros to hypergamy. Definitely. We want to have women who are looking for the best of the best. They're looking for quality. Men, on the other hand, given our innate, mating strategies, we'd be hitting everything that we could hit. That's why pornography is a big deal. We have to have some sort of like social, religious, personal beliefs, some kind of way to buffer the worst aspects of that. And we still do that for men right now. That's why you get guys who are held for sexual harassment. That's why if a guy falls from grace because he's a senator and he's caught with a hooker in a hotel room somewhere, we go, oh, that's horrible, horrible, right? But we don't look at the horrible aspects of an unfettered hypergamy right now, because it's never been unrepressed. This is still a social experiment, and the church sure as hell can't step in anymore. And it used to be a buffer. It used to be something that was like, okay, well, here's the worst aspects. Women can cuckold men if they want to, and we have no problem with them cuckolding them. And I mean that in a sense of retroactive and proactive. So if a woman is a single mother and she gets another beta male guy to marry her in spite of her kids, that's retroactive cuckoldry, is what that ends up being. So there's the proactive and the proactive and the retroactive, let's say. And then for men, it's, well, you're a hound, man. You're a dog. You're a player. You want to go and hit it with as many women as you can. Well, we can't have that going either, because that causes other social ills in society. So how do we rein the worst sides of men's mating strategy and women's strategy in? Well, we have the church to do that. We have marriage to do that. I'm going to forsake all others. Okay. I'm not going to have sex with any other woman except for my wife. Here she is. I love her to death. We're going to have babies. Here's my one caveat. The kids have to be mine. They have to be my kids for me to want to enter into this arrangement. Forsaking all others till death do us part, sickness and health, all of those vows. Same thing with the woman. Okay. what's yours is mine. My resources are yours. I'm going to provide. I'm going to be parentally invested, and I'm going to protect you. And hopefully I'm also a little bit hot and you really want to get with me too. That's going to be sort of a trade-off for what she could be doing if she had unfettered hypergamy. And so the church used to be a buffer in that, and it is no longer a buffer anymore. It's completely gone. So we can talk about like meaning and purpose.
What are the, I don't know if there are any pros to that, but what are the pros and cons to the church not being involved in that equation anymore as kind of the marital North Star or hypergamy North?
I think that, and I mentioned this in the book, is I think the biggest problem in religion right now, and I don't mean just Christianity, I mean in all religions right now, is it's been assimilated by what I call the feminine imperative. So when you have a generation after generation of single mothers, the church has to step in and sort of find some way to resolve that problem. And so what happens is that it no longer becomes about hooking up young couples and having them start a family. It's okay. Sally here has 2 kids from a guy that she was never married to, but we need a good Christian man to come in and marry her, and so she can complete her sort of hypergamous ideal.
Right.
And I think that's that focus right there. We focus primarily on the female side of things rather than focusing on the male side of things when it comes to the church right now. It also used to be the only way to get sexual access, and this is not just Christianity, it could be Islam, it could be Judaism, whatever. The only way to get sexual access to a woman was through marriage, right? That's why we have premarital sex as sort of a proscription, I guess. So that's in the Bible, and or that's in the Quran, right? That's, you're supposed to not have sex until you're married. Well, there's a functional aspect of that, and then there's sort of the belief and the spiritual side of that. The functional aspect of that is that if you've got a man and a woman and they are both virgins when they get together, the more likely that they're going to stay together is a much higher incidence. I can show you the stats for that as well. When a woman has a higher body count, when she's had more sexual partners prior to marriage, she has a higher incidence of marital unhappiness and a higher incidence of not just unhappiness. What was the other one? Higher incidence of unhappiness and a higher incidence of divorce as well as a result of that. Well, it's kind of like, is ignorance bliss kind of thing. What you don't know, if you don't know what you're missing, then it's the best thing in the world for you. So women who are virgins at marriage tend to have a higher incidence of happiness, marital happiness, a lower incidence of divorce. Same thing could be said true for men, but today we don't even think about that. That's not even on the table anymore. But it used to be that men, when they wanted sexual access, they had to marry that girl. She had to make her an honest woman, right? And so that was a proscription by churches at that time that had a function to it, but we didn't realize the function. It was just part of the belief set. And when the sexual revolution hit, it seemed like this horrible oppression of women's sexuality, when in fact it was a buffer against the worst aspects of their mating strategy. Same thing for men. We never said the church is a horrible repressive organization against men's sexuality, because we already wanted, socially, we want men to be in self-control over their sexuality, because we have a much higher sex drive. We have a much higher libido. Just the nature of the beast, right? For women, when we say, oh, well, women will be much more sexual if it wasn't for the church, or if it wasn't for morality, if it wasn't for society holding them back. It's like, no, the problem that you're looking at is that this is not a repression. It's a buffer, in the same way that it's a buffer against men's access. So when the incentive to be a good provider, to have purpose, to want to be a good husband, to want to be a good father, when all of that is removed from that equation, the church has nothing to do. There's nothing to buffer, because there's no incentive for a guy to want to do any of that, whether it's through the Bible or it's through just social norms or whatever. If that guy has no incentive to want to get married, to want to get there, because he can get laid whenever he wants to, and the woman can get laid whenever she wants to as well. So when you take away the kind of the carrots to get the donkey to pull the cart, when you remove that away, it doesn't matter that the church is the one with the stick with the carrot on it anymore, because it doesn't make any difference to those guys, because there's no incentive. So what's the fallout of that? The fallout is that you get exactly where we're at right now, 50 years later, once we've pulled that out. So is it a crisis of spirituality? You could probably say that, but from a latent purpose perspective, it's because you've removed the repression, the quote unquote repression. You've removed the buffers to the self-control over the worst aspects of that mating strategy. And now there's no incentive to go to church because I don't have to go through a middleman to get to sex. I can go get sex however I can go talk to the pickup artists and they'll tell me how to go get sex. That's not a problem at all. So,
but if you still need that meaning in life, could you be searching out that meaning?
That's another question.
Like Tesla or Bitcoin or something like that.
Yeah, that's another question. Like what is meaningful? Like I would argue
BLM or the the conservative version of that. What was it?
Tribalism is what you're talking about. Yeah. Tribalism. Yeah. I write about this also in book 4, is that human beings are innately tribalistic, and our first tribe is our family. That's why we have what's called kin altruism. So you're going to protect your wife and your babies first and foremost. You're going to take a bullet for them. You're going to go down with the ship before men are the disposable sex, women are the valuable sex. Sperm is cheap, eggs are expensive. So when we're talking about tribalism, your first tribe is your family, and then maybe your niece, right? Maybe your nephew, maybe your brother, maybe your uncles, and so then the family becomes extended from that point. And then it's okay, well, you're related to her, you're related to them. And then it becomes sort of a tribe. You might not necessarily be direct blood relatives, but that tribe becomes sort of your group. And then usually it's about 150 to 200 people. And then it becomes sort of this nation. And you're looking for things that unite us. Team sports. Hey, the Niners, right? I mean, that's my tribe. If you look at all the tribes that people have, it's not just about, it becomes less about your direct genetic lineage, and it becomes more about what your team mentality, what your beliefs are. So now my tribe might be Christianity. My tribe might be Islam. My tribe might be the 49ers. My tribe might be the band
Republicans or Democrats or liberals or Democrats.
Exactly. This is where I part ways with guys like, and I love Godsod to death, but this is where I part ways with Godsod and Jordan Peterson, is that they want to reduce tribalism. I'm gonna say there's no way you're going to get that out of the machine that is the human being, because that's where we're at. I am invested emotionally and ego wise into my own family. I'm going to do what's best for my family. I need to have authority over it, and I also have to take responsibility for it. So that's like that kin altruism side of things. And we expand that as human beings into other like belief sets. It could be even an economic belief set. I'm a communist, I'm a capitalist, that kind of stuff. That becomes
I wear a mask, you don't.
Right. I'm black, you're white. Yeah, that's your tribe. You cannot even be blood related, but when you have certain familiarity, human beings are really good at pattern recognition, right? We can see a big herd of brown cows, and if there's a purple cow in the herd, our eyes are gonna go to that, because we're looking for what's called predictive frameworks. I think you mentioned that in the beginning of this. Is human beings want to have some sort of categorization. We want to make order and sense out of the chaos. And how we do that is through pattern recognition. What looks familiar to us? Why is symmetry something that's beautiful to human beings, right? Because
it's like technical analysis and looking at stocks. Yeah.
Yeah. And we don't, yeah, exactly. And we don't, when we do it, and you could make an economic reference to this, but we do that automatically. It's just something that is like instinctual to us. It's in our peripheral awareness to be able to do those things. Tribalism is also one of those things as well. So that's why you get things like Antifa. That's why you get things like Black Lives Matter. That's why because it's the tribe, it's the group, my team above all else. The sisterhood of Morales. I'm on team woman, feminism, gynocentrism. There's no bigger tribe than the tribe of women right now. And so when you look at tribalism, I don't think it's a bug. I think it's a feature, but it's something that we need to sort of take into account to create a predictive framework about what it is that human beings are going to do, why it is we behave in certain ways, and why there is a human nature to begin with.
And especially when you lay over social media and echo chambers.
Oh yeah.
Because Facebook, Twitter, whatever it is,
yeah,
the way they get you on their platform or to spend more time is by introducing you to things that you've expressed interest in the past, therefore creating that feedback loop and that echo chamber that makes it very, very difficult for people to psychologically remove themselves from.
Right. Are you familiar with a guy? He's like this kind of like positivity rapper guy. His name is Zuby. And really, you probably have followed him on. I don't know if you follow him on Twitter or not.
I think I've seen some people I follow retweet some of his stuff. The name definitely sounds familiar. Is he a libertarian guy?
Yeah, more or less. But I actually quoted him in my book. I wanted to look it up I'm just trying to find the page, but I'll just paraphrase really quickly. He was saying that we are in one of the largest social experiments in human history right now. In no way are we prepared to have the kind of communication and the kind of engagement that we have right now as a result of social media.
Right.
So when we're talking about our election policies or whatever is going on, we human beings have never in the history of humanity had the kind of access and the kind of immediate engagement that we have right now. That's how you get cancel culture. That's why that cancel culture has become a weapon against people. It wouldn't exist, or certainly wouldn't exist in the form that it's in, had we not had Instagram or Twitter or whatever else there is. And it's like, oh, did you just for one tweet, right? And you're done, and you can be erased because of one thing. Never in human history have we had that, and never in human history have we advanced so quickly technologically and been more unprepared for that than we are right now. So those are the things that.
Where does that where do you think we'll be from a standpoint of demographics? Let's start there. In 10 years, as far as birth rate, where do you think we will be? Because that the answer you give will help people start to understand how they can take this information and apply it to, like, the real estate market as an example.
Okay, so two things. As far as fertility rate is concerned, if you look at the fertility rate, that is below replacement in most major Western industrialized nations right now. If you have to look at that demographically, though. So if you look at different cultures within those particular countries, you're going to see a higher birth rate amongst, like, say, Muslim cultures right now. Or if you're looking at immigrants that have been brought into, like, say, Western Europe right now and are being brought into the United States. Now, I'm not, again, I just work here. Okay. So, so when it comes to, when you look at the reproduction rate or the fertility rate of certain cultures and ethnicities within the demographic of, say, a Western culture, you're going to see higher fertility rates amongst, say, like Latin Americans or African American communities than you are amongst white communities, right? You're going to see more of this in. It's actually, I think it's probably better to look at the fertility rates versus the replacement rates in countries like, say, Sweden, or countries like Belgium, Holland, more Western European countries. If you look at those, it's much more stark, because we're just now beginning to see this in the United States, or actually paying attention to it. In fact, I would also argue this is that there's going to be a pushback against people trying to look into that right now. Like because it goes against the narrative. It goes against the woke narrative. It goes against the, like, if you ask those things, then you're a eugenicist or something like that, or there's something that's wrong with you just for looking at those. You could be erased, right? Cancel culture will say, well, you're looking into those demographics because because you're white supremacist or something like that.
Oh, I see the nuance of it will be the birth rate, right?
It will end up becoming impolite to go and look at those things. I would say that. The macro level, birth rate going down, it's going to be less in 10 years, significantly less. Yeah, and I think a lot of that is by design at this point. So the other part I was going to say is that, and I mentioned this before we came on, is Morgan Stanley has an article out that I quoted in the book as well. It's called "The Rise of the She Economy." Yeah, and they go into a lot of detail statistically about the percentage of women who are going to be single by 2030. The prime working age women between the ages of 25 and 44, I believe it's like somewhere between 45 and 52% of women, by the time they get to that age or during that age, are going to be single and childless pretty much for the rest of their lives. So, like, when all the conversation we were just having a little while ago about, like, well, when women get to be 34, they're not as, I'm not saying they hit the wall, but they hit the wall up here. They become less competitive at 41 than they could have been at 21. And again, this is not so much like, oh, this is horrible and it's because we're teaching the society thing. It's not a social construct. This is a biological evolutionary dynamic that's happening here. And if we keep going the way we are, we're going to end up, as Morgan Stanley is saying, is that by the time by 2030, women between the ages of 25 and 44 are going to be 45 to 52% of them are going to be single and childless as a result of this if we keep going down this path. So again, predictive framework, Morgan Stanley would not be writing about this if they weren't trying to capitalize on the fact that there's going to be more single women with more, expendable income. And what are they?
And more rudderless males, though, too. I mean, every single thing you're talking about, it just takes me back to more and more tribalism and more social unrest.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it's going to increase. It's going to get worse before it gets better. I'll just say that right now. I was reading on Zero Hedge not too long ago about how the majority of the world's economy is now controlled by women. Like you got Janet Yellen is now the Fed chief, and
Christine Lagarde, ECB.
Yeah, the World Bank, who's the girl? Who's the lady?
Christine Lagarde was in charge of the IMF, and now she's the head of the ECB, the European Central Bank.
So now we are ceding authority and control of the world economy over to a female imperative right now. And I think that's, you want to talk about social unrest, that's going to definitely, because the way that money is going to be allocated right now is women tend to allocate funds or allocate resources through egalitarianism. Female humans tend to be more communitarian. I'm sure you've heard the term, like it takes a village to raise a child, right? It takes this community. And this goes back to, evolutionary psychology, evolutionary biology. Is women tend to be more communitarian. They tend to be more cooperative, although from within that co-op, they might fight amongst each other. But when it's the sisterhood, they are much more solidarity because of that communitarian spirit. They have to, because they're the most vulnerable sex. Yeah. And there's strength and security in numbers. So
the self-defense mechanism.
So when you're looking at human tribalism, when you're looking at the hunter-gatherers that we used to be, that we evolved from, you've got the men who are getting together and they're concerned about information and they're concerned about hierarchy, competence hierarchies, dominance hierarchies. We're the hunters. Meanwhile, the ladies of the tribe are the gatherers. They're the berry pickers. They're the nurturers. They're the ones who they're the life givers. They are the ones that we have to die for and protect because they're the vulnerable sex. It takes them 9 months to gestate a child. So as a result, you've got women who are in the tribe who are sort of codependent and interdependent upon one another. Now, what happens is when one tribe goes in and it kills off the men folk and the boys of the other tribe, and they steal the women, the fertile women of the other tribe, they have to integrate those women into their own tribe. And as a result, because of communitarianism, those women say, well, you might not be part of my tribe, but come in here, sister, because your life is tough to be. It's tough to be a woman. Let's all get in here together and we're going to teach you our songs. We're going to all be nurturing and everything. Not to say that there isn't competition within that collective, but it's that there's much more communitarianism, much more egalitarian ideals from within that. So what happens is when you put women into positions of social power, whether it's economic or it's political power, they tend to opt for egalitarianism, communitarianism, and socialism. So when you hear Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talk about social how are we even having this conversation in the United States, right? You have social Democrats, socialist Democrats. It's like, why? In what reality is that a good idea in the United States? Well, it is when a majority of women are in the House or in the Senate, or we have a female vice president who will soon become president, I believe, at some stage. And the more we cede authority politically, economically, the more egalitarian that ideal becomes. So I was telling you before, it's like when you have the IMF leader, or you've got Janet Yellen controlling the resources of that particular country, they allocate those resources differently than if it were a man who is going to allocate them more meritoriously or meritocracy. It's my belief anyways, that men are innately much more capitalistic and much more concerned with dominance hierarchies and competence hierarchies. And that's how you get businesses. That's how you get capitalism. That's how you get, free economy. Well, you take that and you give that to women, and they've done I forget the name of the study, but they've done these studies where they allocate resources to a group of men and they allocate resources to a group of women. So it's like, maybe it's money or something like that. And for the women, The women will do like, so they'll go one for you, one for you, one for you. Oh, Jenny's got a kid, two for you, one for you, one for you, one for you. And they tend to allocate resources much more like egalitarian or communitarian wise. Men do it based on performance. So if Jim killed the woolly mammoth, you get $10, right? Oh, and John, you helped out, so here's $5. And Mike, you did a good job this time, so here's $3. And Richard, you did okay, here's $1 for you, kind of thing. Like staggering it into a more. And to guys, we think of it in those terms of performance because we have a burden of performance. So. Right. We have to be
economically attractive,
to be economically attractive, to be in that top 20%. We have no other choice but to sort of form a society based on a meritocracy. I'm not saying it's perfect, but ideally based on a meritocracy. For women, when they are forming economics or social groups, it tends to be much more socialist. It tends to be more communitarian. And because we have put women into this since the sexual revolution, because we've put women into positions of socioeconomic power or political power, that's where they gravitate towards. That's why socialism seems like a good idea to this generation of women who are in power in the United States and in other countries as well. Sweden,
or a millennial generation that was raised in maybe a single by a single mother, and then raised by teachers who are 95% female. I want to be clear. Yeah, it's not to say that you can cast that net over all women, because I know a lot of women that watch this channel are the complete opposite of that. They're anarcho-capitalists. But what it is to say is that if you've got a group of 100, yes, you're going to have 10 Margaret Thatchers in there, but you're going to have 90 AOCs. Yes, that's pretty much what we're saying.
The natural proclivity is a community. You will see this even in child psychology. If you go and you look at little girls in their peer clutch, the worst thing for a little girl that's in her sort of social group is to have another girl say, "I don't want to be your friend anymore," right? To kick you out of it, like ostracize you out of the group. It's because, again, women innately understand that there's safety and there's security in numbers, and that's why they tend to form like herds, or they go out with their girls for girls' night out kind of thing. Take that dynamic and put that into a larger meta scale socioeconomic organization, and you want to know why. And I think it was Aaron Clary who told me about this, is that one of the reasons why we see such change in the American corporate culture right now, to like get pregnancy leave and to have childcare at the corporate office.
And virtue signaling.
Well, it's virtue signaling for sure, but like the company cafeteria looks like a kindergarten right now, or the ball pit or whatever. It's because women get into those situations, and those are traditionally male spaces. Women come into that male corporate American space, and they try to make it as female and as comfortable as possible. What happens when they do that? That's when you get more. So I use this term just very loosely here, communitarianism, socialist, into the American corporate workplace, because it makes it more comfortable for women. So it becomes less about the meritocracy and the hierarchy of that created that huge company. Now women come in there, and now it's like bagel Sundays or birthdays here or talent shows this, or was it team building exercises and stuff like that never would have been thought of anytime prior.
So some takeaways there economically is look for MMT a lot more, look for UBI, look for higher taxes, look for more government spending and more government control over the means of production.
Watch where that spending goes, because we're going to see. Here, you want a prediction? Here's a prediction for you right now. I was just looking at this, like the Biden tax plan for capital gains is over 50% in most states right now. Maybe not Nevada, but like certainly in California, it's like 54%.
When you include state tax,
it's absolute insanity. And I was thinking, like, how are we lying down for this? How is this a possibility? And I thought about that for a second. I go, it's not so much about the capital gains tax that I expect to have higher taxes from a Biden administration. I want to know, where they're allocating these. Why do we need that? And where are we taking that money? And what are we funding with that? And I think that what you will see is the priorities that this administration, this very much feminine primary administration has right now, is they're going to put it into programs and into social issues that are much more communitarian, much more socialist, much more female primary, gender studies in Pakistan somewhere. You're going to have the expenditures be directed by imperatives that seem like good ideas to a female psyche.
Right. Do you have kids, Rollo? I think you have a daughter.
I have one daughter. I have a daughter who is she is doing her postgraduate work right now.
What advice did you give her, or do you give her?
As far as, it depends on what we're talking about. Like as far as
how to be, how to be happy in life, understanding what you understand about psychology between men and women. What advice do you give her as she's getting out of college and potentially looking for to start her own household?
Right. Okay. Well, first off, my daughter is very, very smart. She's very talented, very beautiful. I mean, what guy's not, what father's not going to say that, right?
Yeah.
But she's a pageant winner. She's like I said, she's getting her master's degree right now. And again, God hasn't really, I think.
But she's a great example of someone that's going to have a very limited pool of guys to choose from.
Exactly. And I told her that. I said, it's always going to be very difficult. She tells me this all the time. In fact, I get some material from her now and then about like guys, because she's like, there's no guys that want to like if a guy comes on to her, like tries to pick her up at, like at school or wherever, like she's like, oh my God, some guy's actually, talking to me, not coming on to me on Tinder or Bumble or Hinge or whatever else.
That actually has the balls to go up face to face.
Yeah. That actually has the balls to go and do something like that. But she's struggling with that, with the online thing, because she knows that her mother and I was playing in a club at the time when I met my wife, and we took it from there. We met face to face and we liked each other, and I got the number, and that was that, right? But as far as my daughter's concerned, the primary thing I tell her is that she needs to maximize the time that she has. She's 23, right? She just turned 23, and I told her, but she knows who I am. She read my first book, but I tell her, I say, look, right now you're at the top of your game. So you need to maximize everything that you can. I'm not saying start OnlyFans or anything like that. I'm just saying you need to maximize. You need to know that this is the time of your life that you're going to have your highest form of agency right now. Mm-hmm. And you need to maximize that. And, she's got a good head on her shoulders. She's getting a degree right now. And not in women's studies or anything like that. I mean, it's like a useful degree, not underwater basket weaving or anything like that. And so I think she's going to do pretty well for herself. But like when it comes to her personal life, it's like, I understand, like when I was 22, 23, man, I was playing in the Hollywood metal scene of like the late 80s and early 90s. Yeah. And it was a much different sexual marketplace than it is today. And I have to explain to her that she's not only dealing with the local sexual marketplace of where her school is at, but she's also having to deal with the global sexual marketplace as well. Mm. So if she's on like a dating app or something like that, she could get a like or a right swipe or whatever the hell it is from some guy who's in New York and she's in Las Vegas, right? Or you could be across the country. Some guy in Dubai could say, hey, you look good. Let's meet up, kind of thing. And then of course you got to add COVID on top of that as well. But it's finding that. I told us you got to find that balance. You got to look for a guy who is on top of his game. That's I think the number one thing. And to her credit, the guys that she has dated, she's had boyfriends in the past. They've been guys who have been much more in control of their situation. They have a drive. They have a passion. I tell guys this all the time, is that, you need your number one priority needs to be your passion, your direction, your ambition in life.
Yeah, that was my next question, Rollo. So if you want to just tackle that, what would you tell the lost boy generation? How can what's their best strategy for getting into that 20% or becoming what is it, economically or socioeconomically attractive to women? And I love Rich Cooper's content on this. It just really sums up everything. And I wrote that, were you the best version of yourself? I think that's
become the best version of yourself. You need to, I think, first off, if people always throw this question at me, they'll say, what would you tell your 18-year-old self? Nothing, because I wouldn't listen to me at 18 anyways, because I knew everything back then. And really what they're asking me is, what advice do you have for the younger generation? So this is what it really is. I think that you need to find purpose. I think you need to discard all this crap about meaning and esoteric, like ephemeral, I got to find meaning in this or passion in that or what. It's like, no, you need to find purpose. You need to find a direction and go with it. And even if that doesn't end up becoming like what you become later on in life, I never set out to be an author. I never set out to do the things that I did. When I got into, when I was 22, 23 years old, I was in a community college and I was playing in a band because I thought that that's what I really wanted to do. And I did it for a long time and had a great experience. And I learned a lot of things along the way that I still use today. Even this mic, this camera, the board right here is a result of me being in the music industry for a long time. I go, okay, I'm familiar with this. I can figure this out. Being an artist, I figured out how to be a graphic designer, how to be a photographer, how to build websites, how to do video, how to all this stuff. Not because there wasn't a class for that back when I was 22, 23 years old, but because I said yes to those things and I wanted to go ahead with that. Because I had a genuine interest in that helped me develop other skills that were going to be useful for me later on down the road. So when I finally got back into college and when I got my degrees, I already had this skill set that I knew I could use to sort of like keep myself supported and my family supported for that matter, while I was learning other things, or I was getting the degree and getting the things that I just finally decided that that's what I wanted to do. I think that guys today don't understand the level of commitment and the level of drive that they need right now to succeed. You need more than I had, than was required of me. You need more than any other generation right now, because there's always somebody coming up behind you, because the technology changes. Like I was saying with Zuby, the technology changes so rapidly that you need to be on top of your game. And there's a level of intensity and a level of fights, like the eye of the tiger, man. And most guys don't understand what it takes to go from being ordinary to being extraordinary. Mm-hmm. How do I get from the 80 percentile guys into the top 20%? What do I have to do? Most guys say, "No, screw it, I'm out. I'm just going to go play, Call of Duty, right? Or I'm just going to jerk off to porn. I'm just going to eat. I'll have Uber Eats bring me my food, kind of thing. I'm just going to give up, right?" It's easier to give up than it is to actually say, you know what? I want to make my real life better than my virtual life could be, right? If I'm playing online games, or if I'm like wrapped up in social media for that matter, or doing whatever, what does it take to go from ordinary to being extraordinary? And that's the hardest question for most guys, because what I see right now, and I see this in the kids that I like, 20-year-olds that I know right now, and it's like, you don't have the fire. And if you had the fire, you don't know what it would take to make you at the top of, the top 5% of what it is that you want to do, because you don't have that drive. You don't have that hunger to succeed. And I know what Rich Cooper would say is, become the best version of yourself. That's really easy to say. And I love Rich to death. But the problem that most young men have is they don't have that killer instinct. That drive. And they don't realize the amount of sacrifice and the amount of, just like everyday intensity to become that best. And it took me a long time to figure that out myself, is to get that to be competitive. And that's you want to know why we have the Lost Boys generation? Because we've taught this generation and the one before it even to be the participation trophy generation. Right, it's okay. Right. Everybody's a winner. Express yourself emotionally. Be more feminine, because if you're more feminine, then you're a more appropriate young man. You're a good human. I saw those placards in the Great Women's March with the big pink pussy hats, where it's like they had these young boys who were like 5 to 7 years old, and they're carrying these little placards, and it says boys will be boys, and then the last boys is crossed out and it says good humans under it. So it's wrong. You're not a good human if you're a boy. That's the message that these young kids are getting. Well, those kids become the 20-year-olds right now, and they wonder why they're lost, and they don't have any drive, and they don't know what they want to do. And they have all this entertainment, they have all of and I hate to say, I sound like the old guy here, but they have all of this entertainment, and they have all of this, this convenience that probably your generation, my generation did not have. And so we've got like a different mentality about it. But what happened is when I had to go through hardships and when I had to struggle with what it was that I was doing, that was developing that intensity and that drive to say, okay, this is what is needed. If I want that, these are the requirements to get to that. I don't think that Generation Z, and certainly not the millennial generation, have any idea what it takes to become extraordinary. And if they did, they don't have the drive and they don't have the motivation to do so. And that, I think you want to talk about how it's easier to get into BLM. It's easier to get into Antifa and go out there and march in the streets and carry a skateboard around and whack somebody over the head with it than it is to actually take on the responsibility, but take on the fire or develop the killer instinct necessary to become something more. And that's why that's why we're at this trophy participation trophy generation right now, is because we've told them it doesn't matter what that goal doesn't make any difference. It's not going to satisfy you. It's not going to be something that you want to drive towards. And so therefore you got these guys that are sitting around and they'll go, well, I think Jordan Peterson might have the solution to my problems. Rollo Tomassi might have the solutions to my problems. It's like they're looking for the dad that they never had. And so when you don't have that direction, you start looking for mentors outside yourself. And then the ones you're going to gravitate towards are going to be the ones who are going to either like pat you on the back and say it's okay, or they're going to kick you in your ass like Jocko Willenick or something like that, say, get in the gym at 4 a.m, sweat your ass off, and then go and do these things. Like give them some sort of direction, some sort of purpose in their lives, and hope to God that they develop this killer instinct.
Yeah. The best advice, or some advice I can give to that lost boy generation, is you've got to focus on yourself. I mean, so many of these guys are out there on OnlyFans or whatever it is. I've never been married. I don't have any kids. I won't go into my background, but when I read your book, it really resonated. I didn't know what I had done, but I had just inadvertently been that way pretty much my entire life, just since I was a little kid. So it just kind of flowed and it just kind of came natural. But I've noticed that if I ever get into a phase, like when I first retired, that you're out there, you're trying to find a girlfriend or a wife or something like that, you're not going to be that successful. You find that your options are increasingly limited. But when you really focus on yourself, making money, improving your health, being the best version of yourself, as Rich said, if you can do that mentally, you're going to find that everything else, as far as your dating life, will take care of itself.
Well, there's two things, and Rich probably picked up on this too, is women are dream killers. And I don't mean that in that they're maliciously trying to kill your dreams. They're dream killers because you, as a guy, will kill your own dreams with that girl. It's not her fault. It's you that are going to kill your own dreams and your ambitions, and the things that would make you attractive and things that would make you arousing even are going to fade away because you're focusing on that woman. You're focusing on the female, right? Yeah. And you're making her the goal. That should be something else. And then second of all, and I'll tell you what that something else is because for the last, and including my generation, probably even the boomer generation, but for at least 4 generations, we have taught men not to make themselves their most important thing, their what I call mental point of origin.
Right.
Mental point of origin is not the Tony Robbins, just think of yourself, you make yourself number one. That's not what I mean. Mental point of origin is whenever you're faced with any decision, you are the first thing that comes into your mind. It's a subconscious thing. It's not like, oh, confidence and drive. And I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like an actual mental mechanic that's in your brain, so that when you're faced with a decision to take a job or to, go to a restaurant or to do something, the first thought that enters your mind is not, what's my wife going to think? What would a future girlfriend think? What would my mom think? What would my family think? What do you think? What do you want? How does that decision affect you? That should be the first thing that jumps into your head. And for generations, we have taught men to be serviceable, to think of others before themselves, to make other things. And usually it's women. Usually it's the female, right? Because they think that that's going to be the satisfying thing. But usually it's the female or the potential female to be the first thing that jumps into their heads. Should I take that job? Well, if I do, then I will never find the love of my life. If I move to this city, I won't. My wife will be upset. Or if I take that job, my wife will be upset. If I uproot my family, my kids will be upset. No. What do you want to do? The decision has to come. You have to be the first thing that pops into your mind when you're faced with those decisions. That is mental point of origin. And it's not about being a selfish prick. It's not it's not selfishness. It is, how does this affect you? I said this before. I'll reiterate this, is I am a firm believer in enlightened self-interest. Okay. I cannot help anyone until I can help myself.
Atlas
I cannot
shrugged.
help anyone as well as when I help myself first. So when the airplane decompresses and the oxygen masks fall out of the ceiling, what do they tell you to do? Put the mask on yourself first, and then help out the little kid that's sitting next to you. Because you know what? If you don't, you die and the little kid dies, because you both don't have any oxygen because you didn't put it on your face first, or
Right.
the old lady that's sitting next to you, whatever. That is a good example of enlightened self-interest. And if you can apply that, you want advice for the younger generation, enlightened self-interest and mental point of origin are the two places that you need to start up here, at least.
That's right. It sounds like a social Atlas shrugged.
Kind of, yeah, or a personal one, like
Yeah.
interpersonal, like starts from within, kind of thing. Like, think of yourself first. Not saying don't think of others. Don't think of others. Maybe that's the second thought that happens to you. Maybe it's like, well, this is what I want to do. How's this going to affect the others? Great. I'm the first thing that jumps to my mind. That's mental point of origin. So it's not to be like a son of a bitch. It's not to only think about yourself. It is, you are the first thing you think of, not the only thing that you think of. So you and I will tell you this, is once you can develop this as sort of being like, you have to unlearn, probably, you want to talk about blue pill conditioning and teaching our young men to be, like defective women. It starts by teaching those kids, those young men, not to think of themselves first, not to become their mental point of origin. Because if left to their own devices, little boys probably would think of themselves before anything else.
I
So
have.
we teach them.
I'll openly admit I have.
We teach them to be serviceable. We teach them to be, in the future, to be useful tools, as opposed to thinking about how that decision is going to affect them above anything else. And I think that we think of those, and again, if we do that, another result of this communitarian, like you were saying before, was it 78 or 80% of our teachers from the time we're in preschool to the time we're in our postgraduate school are going to be female teachers. They're teaching boys as if they are girls, from the perspective that this is how boys learn. Boys should learn. They don't learn like girls. It's okay. They should learn like girls. And therefore you get a generation of defective girls that become defective young women who are actually men, right? And they're not thinking about themselves first. They're not thinking about the mental point of origin. That's the first thing you have to unlearn. If you say, well, where do I go from here, Rollo? I read your book. What do I do now? Unlearn what you've learned. Unlearn that blue pill mentality that teaches you that you shouldn't, like, you don't have any right to change your mind about anything. You don't have you don't have any right to give yourself permission to do things, because this is what's expected of you, and you expected of you because somebody else put that into you a long time ago.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the biggest keys to my success. Is I've for whatever reason, hats off to my parents or something, I've always been my own mental origin, if that's the correct way of saying it. Ever since I was a kid, and I reflect back on everything that you're saying over my own life, and it's just you see it play out. It just A, B, C, just right down the line. So, boy, what a conversation! I mean, I think we've gone like 2 hours.
2 hours now, yeah.
Usually, I only go 45 minutes. I really appreciate your time. I could go on and on and on. I'd love to tell people my personal story and how your concepts. I've seen that play out in my own life over and over and over again. But we'll have to save that for the next conversation. Sure. So, Rollo, for my viewers who want to find out more about what you do, your books, your writing, your blog, social media, YouTube channel, where can they go to check that out?
The number one dating service in the planet Earth, Instagram. Now, I am on Instagram. You can find me on Twitter. I am Rollo Tomassi at Rational Male. You can also find me. My blog, of course, is therationalmail.com. That's where I do a lot of my writing. I do a lot of my thinking these days. I actually kind of am coming back to it a little bit more. I have 4 books. It's the Rational Mail series of books. You can find all 4 of them on Amazon. And I've got 3 of them are in Audible right now. The 4th one is being read and will be on Audible probably by the end of May, I believe. So that's coming up as well. And I have a YouTube channel, which is, you just look up Rollo Tomassi on YouTube and you'll find my channel. It's The Rational Mail Show. I do I do a short form show and I do a long form show. You talk about like 2 hours. I usually go like 3 hours on Sundays at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. That's my long form show. That's the live stream show that I let, people can, chime in. And then I have like some shorter form videos that I do throughout the week. So Wednesday, I usually release like a 30-minute video. So if in case 3 hours isn't your groove, then you can always, pick me up there. I'm going to be releasing some audio stuff on Anchor as well. That's coming.
What is Anchor?
Anchor is a audio podcasting service, I guess.
Oh,
okay.
It's an
app service. And and the great thing about it is it goes through a lot of different avenues. So you can get it from like Apple iTunes and Spotify and Anchor. So you can get it from all those. And that's why I started working with them. And I am also on a show called Rule Zero with some friends of mine where we pass around the show through the 5 of us. And it's a free thing. We don't do it for money or anything like. I mean, super chats, I guess, but we just pass it around. It's not really a business adventure, but it's just so guys getting together and talking about a lot of the topics you and I got into today. So if that's what you want to,
and that's on YouTube, isn't it, Rollo?
Rule Zero is on YouTube as well, and so it passes from me to Rich Cooper to Ryan Stone, Troy Francis, and then John from Modern Life Dating. All 5 of us are sort of like, we're the primaries. Sometimes it goes to other guys too, but it'll be on actually this Saturday. I am hosting it on my channel, so you can get familiar with it that way. And that's about it. That's how you can get in touch with me. So awesome. I'm on Facebook too. So I'm on all social media, so it's not hard to find.
Yeah, I appreciate your time, my friend. I can't wait to do it again.
Sure. Anytime. Let's do it again.
Hi, guys. I'd like to invite each and every one of you to join me in Miami this June 11th through the 13th for Rebel Capitalist Live, the investment conference. And this is not over Zoom. This is face-to-face. I'm bringing a lot of your favorites from the Rebel Capitalist show to Miami under one roof to speak, to give you the knowledge you need to increase your personal freedom, to become a better investor and make larger returns over the next few years when we have this financial uncertainty that's being caused by the Fed and the government. And finally, it's going to give you an opportunity to really take your understanding of macroeconomics and the world around us to the next level. We've got some incredible speakers lined up that are going to completely blow you away. People like Mike Maloney, Jason Hartman, Ken McElroy, Lynette Zhang, Mark Moss, Brent Johnson, Jeff Snider, just to name a few. The tickets for this event are really going to sell out fast, so make sure you go to Rebel Capitalist Live right now to get all the details and to reserve your spot. We need to come together as a group, as a community, especially after what we dealt with in 2020 and 2021, so we can learn how to build wealth and thrive in a world of out-of-control central banks and big governments. And we need to do this as a group, as a community of fellow rebel capitalists. So don't waste any time. Head over to rebelcapitalistlive.com and I will see you in Miami.